The email had my name nowhere on it, but every word in it was mine. I stood in the back of the conference room while Grant clicked to the next slide, and 300 people applauded the idea I'd built at my own kitchen table at 2 in the morning, while my wife slept and the coffee went cold. My hands were shaking, not from anger, from something older than that, something that had been building for 5 years. Because I'd watched this exact thing happen more times than I could count, and every single time, I said nothing. I smiled. I clapped. I went home. You know the feeling. You let something slide once. The second time is easier, and by the 10th time the silence just becomes who you are. That morning I promised myself it was the last time. I was wrong about that too. Because what I didn't know yet was that somewhere on a server nobody had touched in years, in a file I'd forgotten I ever saved, my name was still sitting on all of it, waiting for someone to finally look. My name is Daniel Reyes. For 11 years I worked as a senior data analyst at a logistics company called Meridian Freight. If you drove past our building, you'd never think twice about it. Gray glass, a parking lot, a lobby with a fake plant somebody watered on Fridays. Most of my life happened in a cubicle on the 4th floor, under lights that hummed like they had something to say. I was good at my job. I want to be careful how I say that, because for years I couldn't say it at all. But I was. I could look at a mess of numbers, routes, fuel costs, delivery windows, and see the shape underneath, where the money was leaking, where a small change saved a fortune. It came easy to me the way music comes easy to some people. I never bragged about it. My father taught me that a man does the work and lets the work speak. He said it like a promise. He never told me what to do when someone else does the speaking for you. My manager was a man named Grant Whitfield. Tall, easy laugh, the kind of handshake that makes you feel chosen. Grant could walk into a room of angry executives and walk out with everyone smiling. That was his gift, and I want to be fair, it's a real gift. He just didn't have the other one. He couldn't build the thing. He could only sell it. At home there was Erin, my wife, 9 years married, and we had a mortgage that felt like a third person living in the house. Always hungry, always at the table. Erin worked nights as a nurse. We'd pass each other in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, her coming home, me leaving, and we'd trade the same tired kiss like a shift change. We told ourselves it was temporary. Everybody tells themselves that. So when Grant started leaning on me, stay late, run the extra model, you're the only one who gets this stuff, Danny, I said yes. Of course I said yes. That's what you do when you have a mortgage and a good review and a boss who smiles at you. You say yes, and you tell yourself it's building towards something. The first project I really poured myself into was a rerouting system for the Northeast Corridor. 3 months of nights. I built it clean. When it went live, it cut delivery times by 19%. In our world, that's not a number, that's a miracle. The morning we presented it to the regional directors, Grant asked me to sit in the back. Support role, he said, in case they have technical questions. So I sat in the back, and I watched him stand up there and say the word I 40 times. I counted. I was young enough then to still count and think it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was the first time. And the thing about the first time is you don't recognize it. You think it's an accident. You wait for him to correct it later, to pull you aside, to say your name to the people who mattered. He never said my name. Not once. Afterward, in the hallway, one of the directors shook Grant's hand and said, "Sharp thinking, Whitfield." And Grant looked over at me for half a second, just half a second, and I swear he almost said it. My name. It was right there in his mouth. Then he swallowed it and said, "Thank you, sir." It was a long few months. A long few months. He hadn't touched a line of it. I went home that night and didn't tell Erin. She asked how the big meeting went, and I said, "Fine." It went fine. That was the first thing I hid from her. It wouldn't be the last. There would be so many that eventually I lost count of what she knew and what I'd buried. The second time was cleaner than the first, and that scared me more. We had a client almost walk, a big grocery chain threatening to pull their contract over late shipments. I spent a weekend I'd promised to Erin building the fix. missed her sister's birthday dinner, sat in a corner with my laptop while everyone pretended not to notice the empty chair. By Monday, I had it solved. By Wednesday, Grant had told the whole floor how he pulled an all-nighter to save the account. People clapped him on the back at the coffee machine. One of them, a kid named Marcus from accounting, said to me, "Your boss is a machine, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, he really is." I smiled when I said it. That's the part one still think about. You want to know why I stayed silent? Everybody does. From the outside, it looks so simple. Just speak up. Just say, that was mine. But you're not standing where I was standing. Here's where I was standing. I was 41. We had $11,000 in savings and a mortgage that ate most of what I made. Aaron's hospital had done 2 rounds of layoffs that year. My father, the one who taught me that the work speaks, he'd spent the last 3 years of his life in a nursing home that cost more per month than our house, and I was still paying off what the insurance didn't cover. Every time I imagined walking into HR, I saw the same thing. A gap in my resume. A reference from a boss I'd just accused. A payment I'd miss. Erin's face when I told her. Silence has a price. So does noise. And when you can't afford either, you just pick the one that keeps the lights on. So I built a story instead. I told myself Grant needed me. That made me important. I told myself that people who mattered could see the truth, even if they never said it. I told myself that one day there'd be a promotion, a title, a moment where it all evened out. I fed that story every morning like it was a pet. It kept me company. It also kept me exactly where I was. The worst part wasn't Grant. I need you to understand that. The worst part was what I started doing to myself. I stopped putting my name on things. Literally. I'd finish a model, and instead of saving it as Reyes_final, I'd save it to the shared drive under whatever name Grant wanted on it. I erased myself, one file at a time, and I told myself it was humility. There's a word for a man who does his best work and hides that he did it. I didn't have the word yet. I just had the feeling. It sat in my chest like a stone I'd swallowed and couldn't cough up. Erin knew something was wrong. She'd catch me staring at nothing. "Where'd you go just now?" she'd ask. And I'd come back and say, "Nowhere. Just tired." Another thing hidden. The pile was growing, and I was the only one who could see it. Then Grant got promoted. Director of Operations. My rerouting system was the centerpiece of his case. I found out from an email blast. "Please join us in congratulating Grant Whitfield." I read it twice, walked to the bathroom, locked the stall, and sat there a while. I want to tell you I planned something in that stall. A move. A confrontation. I didn't. I just sat there listening to the fan run. I've never told anyone what that year did to me. I'll tell you. I stopped sleeping right. Not all at once. It creeps. First you're up till 1. Then you're up at 3 staring at the ceiling, running the conversations you'll never have, saying the brave things to the dark that you'd never say to Grant's face. Then you're drinking coffee at 4 in the afternoon just to feel like a person, and the coffee stops working and everything gets a gray film over it. I started dreading Sundays. Not Mondays. Sundays. Because Sunday was when the weight of the whole coming week would settle on my chest around 4 in the afternoon, and Erin would find me on the couch, not watching the TV that was on. She'd sit down next to me and not say anything, just put her hand on my knee, and somehow that made it worse. Because I couldn't tell her why. How do you explain to the woman working nights to save your house that you're falling apart over who gets credit at a freight company? It sounded small even to me. It sounded like a man complaining about a good thing. But it wasn't about the credit. I understand that now. It was about the slow erasing. Every time Grant said, a little more of me got sanded off. And a man who lets himself be sanded down long enough forgets what shape he used to be. I'd catch my reflection in the black screen of my monitor between tasks, and I didn't recognize the face. It looked patient. It looked agreeable. It looked like a man who'd made peace with being no one. Erin and I stopped talking about the future. You don't notice when it happens. You just realize one day that neither of you says someday anymore. We used to talk about a lake house. Nothing fancy. A dock and a couple of chairs. Somewhere along the way we stopped. because dreaming out loud felt like lying, and we were both too tired to lie. There was one night I'll never forget. She came home from a double shift and found me at the kitchen table at 5 in the morning, building another model. For Grant. For free. For nothing that would ever have my name on it. She stood in the doorway in her scrubs, still smelling like the hospital, and she looked at me, and she said the truest thing anybody said to me in those years. She said, "Daniel, you're working like the man who owns the place, and you're being paid like the man who cleans it. And you won't tell me why." I didn't have an answer. Or I had one, and I was too ashamed to say it. Because the answer was, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of losing this house. I'm afraid I'm not as good as I think I am, and speaking up will prove it. I'm afraid Grant is right about me, that I'm the guy in the back of the room, and always was. I closed the laptop that night. I told her I'd figure it out. And for about a week, I tried. I rehearsed what I'd say to Grant. In the car, in the shower, at red lights. I had the whole speech. Calm, fair, no accusations. Just the truth, said out loud. Finally, I got as far as his doorway once. He looked up, smiled that smile, said, "Danny, just the man. I need you on something." And the whole speech evaporated. Every word of it. I nodded and went back to my desk and built the thing he needed, and I hated myself the entire time, and I did it anyway. That's the part nobody tells you about fear. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like the weather, like something that just is. Shame is a quiet landlord. It never raises its voice. It just keeps collecting. Then two things happened in the same spring, and looking back, they were the two ends of a rope I didn't know I was standing on. The first was the biggest project of my life. Meridian landed a contract to overhaul logistics for a national pharmacy chain. The kind of deal that changes a company. Time-sensitive medication, thousands of locations, no room for error. If it worked, it would be the biggest thing Meridian had ever done. Grant walked into my cube, sat on the edge of my desk like he always did, and said, "Danny, this one's ours. You and me. I'll handle the room. You handle the magic. Ours." He actually said ours, and God help me, some starved little part of me lit up at the word. I built it. For months this time. I built a system that could reroute a temperature-sensitive shipment in real time if a truck broke down, that could predict a shortage in Phoenix from a weather pattern in Denver. It was the best work I'd ever done. It was, if I'm honest, beautiful. I'd sit back at 2 in the morning and watch it running and feel, for a few minutes, like myself again. Like the kid whose father said the work speaks. Here's the thing about that project, the thing that mattered later. I was so proud of it, so quietly, secretly proud, that for the first time in years, I couldn't fully erase myself. I saved my working files the old way. My way. On my own drive, in a folder labeled with my name, with every version dated, every model documented, every note in my own words. Not to prove anything. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't building a case. I didn't have the courage for a case. I just couldn't stand to let this one be nameless. It was the only piece of dignity I had left, and I kept it in a folder like a man keeping a photograph in his wallet. That was the first end of the rope. The second end was a woman named Margaret Cole. Meridian's founder had sold the company that spring, and the new parent brought in their own chief executive. Margaret Cole, late 50s, sharp, quiet in a way that made loud people nervous. She'd come up through operations herself, decades ago, back when a woman in that room was a story in itself. People said she read everything. People said she couldn't be charmed, and in our building, where charm was the whole currency, that landed like a threat. I met her exactly once that spring. She walked the floor, actually walked it, cube by cube, which no executive had done in my 11 years. She stopped at mine, looked at my second monitor, where the pharmacy model was running its simulation, all those little trucks moving across the map. She watched it a moment. Then she looked at me and asked one question. "Whose is this?" And I froze, because Grant was standing 8 feet away. I said, "It's the team's, ma'am. Grant's initiative." She looked at me a second longer than was comfortable. She had eyes that didn't miss much. She said, and she moved on. I went home that night and hated myself in a new and specific way. She'd given me a door. A stranger, a busy woman, had stopped and handed me a door, and I'd shut it with my own hand. I didn't even understand why, except that Grant was standing there, and old habits are stronger than new chances. I didn't know she'd remember. I didn't know people like Margaret Cole remember everything. The pharmacy system launched in September. It worked. It worked better than anything Meridian had ever built. Within a month, the numbers were undeniable. Fewer missed deliveries, millions saved. A client so happy they signed a 3-year extension. The whole company felt it. There was a buzz in the building I hadn't felt in years. And there was a celebration. A real one, catered, downtown. The kind with a rented room and a slideshow and executives who never came down from the top floor. I wore my one good jacket. Erin couldn't come. She had a shift. So I stood near the back, the way I always did, with a plastic cup of wine, and I watched Grant walk to the front of the room. I could recite his speech in my sleep. I've replayed it enough. He talked about vision. He talked about the sleepless nights, his sleepless nights. He talked about betting on himself, about seeing the future when no one else could. He used the word, "I," the way a man throws confetti. And at the end, leadership announced that Grant Whitfield was being promoted to Vice President of Operations. The room stood up. I stood up too. Sit with that a second, because it's the most honest thing I can tell you about who I'd become. My work was being celebrated by 300 people. My boss was being made a vice president on the strength of 4 months of my life. And I stood up and I clapped. My hands came together on their own. 11 years of trained silence, and my body applauded my own erasing without asking my permission. That was the night I told you about at the very beginning. My hands shaking. Something older than anger. There was one person in that room who wasn't clapping. Her name was Priya Nair. She joined my team 8 months earlier, a young analyst, sharp, still new enough to see clearly. She'd watched me build the pharmacy system. She'd asked me questions about it late at night when we were both stuck at our desks. She knew. And across that crowded room, while everyone else was on their feet, Priya was looking at me, not at Grant, at me. And her face wasn't celebrating. It was closer to grief, like she was watching a man attend his own funeral and hand out the programs. After the speeches, she found me by the coat rack. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just said, quietly, "That was your system, Daniel." I was there. "That was yours." And I gave her the same line I'd given everyone for 5 years. I said, "It's a team effort." And she looked at me, this kid, 28 years old, and she said something I couldn't shake. She said, "My dad worked 30 years at a plant and let a foreman take his pension idea. He died angry about it. I'm not trying to be rude. I just don't want that to be you." I drove home the long way. I sat in the driveway with the engine off for almost an hour. Erin's car wasn't there, still at the hospital. The house was dark, and I did something I hadn't done since my father's funeral. I put my head on the steering wheel, and I cried. Not gentle, the kind that comes up from somewhere you'd sealed off. For a whole life spent in the back of the room. For the man my father thought he'd raised. When I finally went inside, I opened my laptop. I found the folder with my name on it. The pharmacy files. Every dated version. And I sat looking at them. And for the first time in 5 years, I let myself think a dangerous thought. Not revenge. Something quieter and more frightening than revenge. The truth. I didn't do anything with it. Not yet. I closed the laptop. But something had moved that couldn't move back. For 3 weeks after that night, I did nothing. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about a brave man. I went to work. I built the next thing. I let Grant, now Vice President Whitfield, sit on the edge of my desk and call me Danny. I told myself Priya was young and didn't understand the real world. I went back to sleep, the way you do. But something small had changed, and small changes are the only kind that ever last. I updated my resume. Just to look. That's what I told myself, just to look. I started taking a call here and there. And in early November, A company across town offered me a position. Senior analyst, a real title, more money than Grant had ever let me sniff. I hadn't accepted. I hadn't told Aaron. The offer sat in my inbox. I walked past it every morning. I knew what it was. That was the problem. While I was sitting on that offer, unable to jump and unable to stay, something happened that had nothing to do with me. Or so it seemed. Margaret Cole ordered a full systems audit. This is the part people never believe, but it's the most ordinary thing in the world. New leadership comes in. They want to know what they've bought. Every server, every drive, every archived file, cataloged, migrated to a new platform, documented. The kind of project that puts IT departments in a bad mood for a quarter. Nobody thought twice about it. I didn't think twice about it. The man running the migration was a quiet guy everyone called Tom from IT. The one who fixed your monitor and never got thanked. Tom had one rule for the migration, a rule Margaret had insisted on personally. Nothing gets deleted, and everything keeps its original metadata. Author. Creation date. Every version. She wanted a true record of what the company actually owned and who had actually built it. At the time, people grumbled. It slowed everything down. Nobody understood why the new CEO cared so much about who created a spreadsheet in 2019. I think I understand now. I think a woman who came up the way she did, in the room she came up in, had watched a lot of work get renamed. I think she'd stood in the back of a few rooms herself. But that's me guessing. I only know what happened. What happened was this. When Tom's migration reached the operations archives, the system did exactly what Margaret told it to do. It preserved everything. And buried in there, untouched for years because nobody deletes anything at a freight company, were the original files. Not just the pharmacy system. All of it. The Northeast rerouting. The grocery chain fix. 5 years of work, and every single file carried the same piece of metadata in the author field. The piece I'd been too careful, or too proud, or too broken to erase on the one project that mattered, and too worn out, thank God, to erase on all the others. Daniel Reyes. Created by Daniel Reyes. Over and over and over. I didn't know any of this was happening. I was at my desk, staring at a job offer, trying to decide if I was brave enough to save myself, while a quiet machine 3 floors down was doing the saving for me. Tom flagged it. That's all it took. One honest man doing his job the right way. He noticed that the author on the company's most celebrated systems didn't match the name on any of the presentations, any of the press, any of the promotions. And Tom, who'd fixed my monitor twice and knew exactly who I was, did the thing most people are too tired to do. He didn't shrug. He wrote it up. And he sent it to the one person who'd asked to see anything unusual. Margaret Cole. I found out I'd been summoned to the CEO's office on a Tuesday. An email from Margaret Cole's assistant. Ms. Cole would like 30 minutes with you Thursday. Please treat this as confidential. No reason. No subject beyond that. I want to tell you what a message like that does to a man who spent 5 years hiding. It doesn't feel like opportunity. It feels like the end. I was sure I was being fired. I was sure, somehow, that they'd found out I was talking to another company, that the offer in my inbox had leaked, that this was the walk to the exit. I didn't sleep Tuesday. I didn't sleep Wednesday. Aaron caught me at the kitchen table Wednesday night and sat down across from me. And this time I didn't say nowhere. This time I told her everything. All of it. 5 years, poured out over a cold cup of coffee at 1 in the morning. The rerouting system. The grocery account. The pharmacy launch. The night in the driveway. Priya. The job offer I hadn't told her about. The folder with my name on it. I watched her face the whole time, waiting for the disappointment, waiting for her to ask how I could have let it go on so long, how I could have hidden it from her. She didn't ask that. When I finished, she was quiet a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hand, the way she had on that couch on all those gray Sundays, and she said, I always knew you were the one who built things, Daniel. I didn't need a meeting to tell me that. I just needed you to know it. And then she said, whatever happens Thursday, you already stopped hiding tonight. The rest is just paperwork. I slept that night. First time in weeks. Whatever was coming Thursday, I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. And it turns out that's most of the weight right there. Thursday, I put on the good jacket again. I took the elevator to a floor I'd been on maybe twice in 11 years. Margaret Cole's office had a window that looked out over the whole freight yard. All those trucks I'd spent my life moving around a map. She was at her desk, and on it, closed, was a laptop. She asked me to sit. She didn't smile. I told you. She wasn't a smiler, but her eyes weren't unkind. She said, "Mr. Reyes, do you know why you're here?" And I made a decision in that chair. Maybe the first real decision I'd made in 5 years. I decided I was done guessing what people wanted to hear. I decided that whatever was coming, I'd meet it as myself. I said, "No, ma'am. But I've spent 5 years being afraid of rooms like this one, and I'm too tired to be afraid today. So whatever it is, just tell me straight." Something changed in her face. Not a smile. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting to see if I'd say something true. She turned the laptop around and opened it. And there, on the screen, was a folder I knew better than my own hands. Every file, every date, and in a column she'd had them highlight in yellow, one name, repeated down the whole length of the screen. Daniel Reyes. Daniel Reyes. Daniel Reyes. "Then let's start with the truth," she said. "Because it appears you've been telling it in metadata for 5 years, even when you wouldn't tell it out loud. I'd like to hear it in your own voice now." So I told her everything. Again, but this time to the one person in the building who could do something about it. I walked her through all of it. I opened the pharmacy files and showed her the system running, the little trucks moving across the map the way she'd watched them that day at my cube. I showed her the dated versions, the 4 months of nights. I showed her the rerouting system from 5 years back, the grocery fix, the weekend I missed the birthday dinner. She asked precise questions. She'd read the code summaries before I walked in. She already knew most of the answer. She just wanted to watch me finally say it. And when I was done, she was quiet a while. Then she said something I've carried with me since. She said, "I've spent 40 years in this industry, Mr. Reyes. Do you know what's rarer than talent? A record. You didn't just do the work. You left a trail of the truth, even when you were too frightened to stand on it. That trail is the only reason we're both sitting here." She closed the laptop. "The work speaks," she said. "It just needed someone to finally listen. I want to stop right here, because if you've come this far, I think you already know why. Maybe you're the one in the back of your own room. Maybe you've got a folder somewhere, real or in your heart, with your name on work someone else took a bow for. Maybe you've been telling yourself the same story I told myself, that speaking up costs too much, that silence is the safe choice, that someday it'll even out on its own. I told that story for 5 years. It cost me my sleep, nearly my marriage, and very nearly the man my father raised. So I'm not going to sell you a happy ending you don't believe. I'm just going to say, I see you back there. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us every day. Because these are the stories we tell here, the quiet ones, about ordinary people at kitchen tables at 2 in the morning, and the moment the truth finally catches up. Now let me tell you what happened to Grant. Margaret didn't fire him in a hallway. She was more deliberate than that. She scheduled a meeting, Grant, me, the head of HR, and herself. Grant walked in with that handshake, that easy laugh, already working the room before he'd sat down. "Margaret, great to finally get some real time with you." He didn't even look at me. Why would he? I was furniture. She let him talk. She let him do the whole performance. The vision, the sleepless nights, the bet on himself. She let him hang every word he had. And then she opened the laptop and turned it around, and she watched his face meet the yellow column. Daniel Reyes. Daniel Reyes. Daniel Reyes. I have never seen a man's face do what Grant's did. The charm didn't drain slowly. It fell off all at once, like a mask with a cut string, and underneath it there was nothing I recognized. No villain. Just a frightened man who'd been selling a thing he couldn't build for so long he'd forgotten it wasn't his. He looked at me then. First time all meeting. And he said the only true thing I ever heard him say. He said, Danny, and then he stopped. Because there was no end to that sentence that wasn't a confession. Margaret said, very quietly, I think you should let him finish his own sentence for once. Grant resigned within the month. Margaret gave him the room to do it quietly, more mercy than I'd have managed. I heard he landed at another company, selling something else he didn't make. I don't wish him harm. That surprised me, the not wishing. I'd spent 5 years imagining his downfall, and when it came, it just felt like weather. It happened, and then it was over, and I was still standing there, having to decide who I wanted to be next. Because that was the real question. Not what happened to Grant. What happened to me? Margaret offered me his job, vice president, the title built on my own 5 years. I sat with it a week. Then I turned it down. Not out of pride. I just knew that if I took that chair, I'd always be the man who got even, and I didn't want to build the rest of my life on getting even. I took a different role, director of systems, my own team, my own name on the door, and I took the race. I'm not a saint. We had a mortgage. I made Priya my second in command. The kid who told me about her father and his pension, who didn't want that to be me. First thing I did was put her name on her own work, in writing, in front of people. She cried at her desk. I pretended not to see, the way you do. Erin and I bought the lake house last spring. Nothing fancy. A dock and a couple of chairs, just like we used to say before we stopped saying it. She's cut back to 3 shifts a week. Some mornings we actually eat breakfast at the same table, at the same time, like people who own their own hours. We don't trade the tired shift change kiss anymore. We just sit there. Sometimes we don't say anything at all. It's the good kind of quiet now. The kind that isn't hiding something. I still have the folder. The one with my name on every file. I don't need it anymore. Nobody's coming for the truth these days. But I keep it. Sometimes, late, I open it and scroll down that column. Daniel Reyes. Daniel Reyes. Daniel Reyes. Not to feel proud. Just to remember the man who was too scared to say it out loud. And to make sure I never leave him back there again. My father was right. The work speaks. He just left out the last part, the part it took me 5 years and a stranger with a laptop to learn. Sometimes you have to be the one who finally listens. If this story found something in you tonight, if you've got a folder of your own, do me one favor. Share it with 5 people who need to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me about the room you've been standing in the back of. And tell me what story you want me to hear next. I'll be here tomorrow. Same table, same time.